Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. It's about time I added another unit to my Renegade Crowns project. Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Counter-Attack Bases. They stock a wide range of counters, gaming aids and movement trays for multiple game systems, and offer custom items to suit your club, your event, or even your podcast or YouTube channel. Check out the link in the video description. It's been too long. I've been really busy, but since January, when I took 1,000 points of my Renegade Crowns to doubles at the Warhammer World Throne of Skulls event, which somehow managed to win with my friend Danny. It was absolutely fantastic, loads of fun. If you haven't seen the video around that, I'll pop a link into that now. But I've been meaning to add to the rest of the army for quite a while, take it up to 1,500, then up to 2,000 and beyond. But I've just been busy doing so many other things. So this video, I'm adding some Badlands Ogres, but I'm not using the official metal miniatures. I'm going to be using some really simple Kitbashes to give them a bit of a Cathay theme. So let's find out what I did. So this is the 1,000 point list. And what you see is a giant, a bone grinder giant, using one of the Gargant miniatures from Age of Sigmar. And then the core of the army for this first half was set around a prince who hailed from Marienburg and has some Anand's blades, or veteran sellswords with him. And I really like that theme for it, but I don't want to keep that for the whole 2,000 points of Renegade Crowns. I wanted to work a little bit like a Dogs of War army. So the idea that different captains bring their troops from different regions. Some of that's just manufactured using my own a little bit of lore. So the Empire Archers are actually using the halfling miniatures there, which is really cool. The idea is they're part of their own little separate contingent, and the mortar is actually the halfling hot pot. So while in the rules they don't have any connection at all, lore-wise I think that works quite well. The Bombard has links to the Marienburg side of things in my head, and then the Outcast Wizard is an outcast from Cathay and is very much on her own. More recently, I've worked on a BSB, and he's captain, but has the might of Miragliano, and he will actually lead a sort of second contingent within the force. He hails from Talia, and the pikemen that he's going to be leading also hail from Talia as well. Again, they're just going to be sellswords, but they're going to be using all the cool rules that go with that. Now, I quite like my mercenary contingent. I've obviously got the Bone Grinder Giant there, so I thought it would be fun to use Badlands Ogres rather than the Imperial Ogres, which I already have in my Nuln army. Love the sculpts. I wanted to go for something a slightly different vibe. And I do love these old miniatures, but they do work out as £70 just for 5 of them. And I wanted something that fitted in with the sort of strange themes that I have of the army. Of course, these fit in completely, but there's also the opportunity to create something new and a little bit interesting. So I decided to use the standard Ogre Ball miniatures, which had just been discontinued. I have everything I need, including a coffee and a chip Somerset cricket mug. When I originally planned this video, I thought I might even record it as a bit of a tutorial about how to do this kitbash, but it's incredibly simple. There's no green stuff work in it. It's just cutting bits from spare kits and sticking them on in place of other bits from the standard Ogre kit. And then the second point of that is when I started building these and planning these, the Ogre range got pretty much removed from the system. Looks like AOS is going to have a refresh, and as Warhammer the Old World players, we're all hoping that we're going to see Ogres come to the game they should be in with square bases. And so fingers crossed for that. I'm sure it'll happen at some point in the future, especially with their proximity to the land of Cathay. And that is the connection that I'm using with these miniatures. My really simple basic lore idea for these is that they've all served the kingdom of Cathay, maybe as loaders in artillery teams. We've already seen those wonderful miniatures in the Cathay range, so I've delved into those kits a little bit, but maybe at other points in the military as well. Building a unit of 6, I'm using the Iron Guts miniatures because I've given them all great weapons, so I've wanted those two-handed weapons. The rear rank have all got two-handed weapons raised above them, and they're only minor conversions. I'm pretty much just swapping out their belly plates for the Cathay and shields. Note they just fit perfectly on that little slot. You can just glue them straight on, and I've just added a few other little extra bits of armor. I've taken some of the little notches and dented bits off the helmets to make them look like they were slightly well equipped, having been serving Cathay, using the Cathay banner as a back banner, and just adding some little extra bits, including from kits like the Cathay and Sentinel. I'm used some of the armoured parts as shoulder guards and things like that, and even using the hat from one of the newer peasant kits, and it didn't quite fit on, so I've had to snip the top of his head on so it looks like it's actually sitting on his head rather than resting comically on top. But again, nothing really stressful here, trimming bits off, adding little bits on just to add a little bit of extra flavour and feel for them. And I think what you end up with is something that look like standard ogre balls that have been a little bit tamed and a little bit more civilized and kitted out with some slightly Cathay and stuff, and that really works. The theme that I've got going well. They're now separate from Cathay. They're off earning their own gold crowns in the Empire. So I will be holding the paints that I'm using up to the camera. If you want to make a note of them, just pause the video. I won't be posting a link of them in the comments. There will be images of all of the paints that I've used for the project on my Patreon. So just head over, there's a link in the video description. Any support on the Patreon really helps me to continue to make videos like this. However, though, that post is free to use. You do have to be registered as a Patreon member to do that, but free members do get access for that. So you are most welcome if you can't afford to support me in a financial way, but like to support me by likes and comments and still being a member of my Patreon. You may have already seen the speed paint video that I did for ogres a fair few months back now, at some point last year. I'll try to remember to pop a link into that video. Some of the methods I'm using here are very similar. So I'm using over a black prime flesh tones to build up a zenithal like layer of skin textures, trying to do pretty much all my skin work with my airbrush, working with the detail on the miniature and the angle that I hold it to keep the shadows in the undercuts, and to slowly move towards lighter and lighter shades of skin and flesh, as if the light was shining down on the miniature. It gives you really nice smooth transitions. It's so much quicker than building them up using a hairy brush and taking your time in that way. And then afterwards I will glaze in some washes and some contrast paints, which I'll thin and turn into glazes as well, just to add extra depth and extra colour to them, and you'll see that in a moment. And just so much heavy lifting, and is a really quick way to sort of speed up army painting, which tends to be what I do. This is army painting, and cool looking armies for sure, but this isn't a display piece. I'm not showing you how to win a Golden Demon Award with this painting side of this video. I'm being quite clever with this as well. As I get to the really bright layers of flesh, the lightest layers, when it comes out really thin through the airbrush, it's almost white, and I'm allowing that to overspray now onto the other areas of the miniature, in particular the trousers and some of the wooden areas, because I'm turning this into an underpaint for the rest of the miniature. So I've done my flesh stages with the airbrush, but at the same time I'm creating a zenithal underpaint for the rest of the miniature, so that I can do a lot of glazing on top, and again speed up the time that it takes to paint this unit, but also have some really cool effects afterwards. And to give that a real boost, I'm just using a little bit of white now, just to focus on certain areas of the clothing, mostly the trousers here, really accentuating the way the light shines off their butts, off their calves, and maybe a little bit of the side of the boot, because when I do add those glazes in a few moments time, you'll really see the effect that it gives you. You get this really nice underpainted miniature that looks like you spent ages doing some nice highlights when you haven't. It's just all through the airbrush. Now the back banner that the standard has been stolen, borrowed from Grand Cathay, and I wanted to keep it black to really stand out from the white uniform theme that the unit's got going on as well. So I've decided that the best way to get a nice smooth highlight is to airbrush some greys on there. It's so much quicker than using the hairy brush, but I don't want to get that paint all over the miniature, so I'm just using a little bit of cling film as a way of masking. If you've never done it before, it's super easy, it's really cheap as well. You don't have to spend ages messing around, and then none of that grey paint is getting on the rest of the miniature, but two subtle airbrushes sort of in a zenithal style from the top, just to pick up some of that detail and texture on the banner. Now that is the airbrush stages done with, and I'm moving on to some dry brushing, some really light dry brushing with white on the areas that basically aren't flesh or aren't armor, just to catch a little bit of the detail. I mean, this is super light stuff. I'm using a dry palette, I'm using a texture palette as well to test how much paint is coming back off, and I'm focusing on the boots and across the little packs and belts and things. And that what that really does is it picks out the top and the bottom edges of the belts, some of the corners of the packs. So again, when I add some glazes on top, you get a nice highlighted effect already. This is kind of a bit of slap chop midway through painting the miniature, and it's just a great way of doing it. Slap chop is obviously a phrase that's used in the community and is really useful of describing what you're doing, but essentially it's underpainting. It's been around for years, and if you're able to master it or do a really decent job of it, you can save so much time with the rest of your miniature painting, and I absolutely love it. Use it in most projects. Now it's time to start applying some of those paints. I'm using Grim Black here from Army Painter's Speed Paint. It's a really nice go-to all-round black. It's got enough pigment that when it runs into the recesses it shades really well, but it's really smooth on those flatter areas, so you get this really nice ready highlighted looking black effect. Now I will highlight on top of this. That's something I do. I like to highlight in most cases on top of where I'm adding these contrast style glaze layers over the top of the slap shop, and you end up with a really nice finished looking miniature that looks like you spent time painting it regularly. I'm also using some brown here, and these are obviously going on the pouches and the belts and any leather straps holding the armor on. So these stages I just enjoy. I really enjoy painting in these speed style paints. They go on rather smoothly, and when you've got a nice prepared miniature with a really decent quality underpainting, you're already seeing a beautiful effect when you first put them down. I much prefer this than starting with a more traditional style painting of a flat colour and then highlighting slowly up. I do highlight, as I've already said, on top of this, but I just find this more pleasing, and the underpainted effect almost helps you with your further highlights because it shows you where you need to add them, and then there are sometimes areas where you just don't need to highlight at all because you're glazing on thin enough, your underpainting is good enough that the effect is good enough to leave as it is. And one of those areas, on this miniature at least, is the trousers. So I've worked with those zenithal layers with the airbrush and then the white as well. A subtle tiny amount of dry brushing as well. Most of that, as I said already, was focused on the packs and the belts and the boots and things, but a little bit, and by glazing on this really thin down mix of Skeleton Horde with some Army Paint Speed Paint medium, you just get this really nice sepia off-white tone all over it, and because all of those details are already picked up, they just show through and makes it look like you've been highlighting to the edges, and it just saves so much time. Using the same colours in other areas on the miniature as well to keep that palette limited. I don't want too many colours all over the place, so on the drums it's perfect for a drum skin kind of colour. A little bit of Nasdrag yellow, a slight departure from the Skeleton Horde and brown and black that I've pretty much used for the rest of the palette. It's still very similar to the palette, it's just a little bit more vibrant, and a slight departure for the champion's straw hat that he's stolen from some poor unsuspecting peasant that I hope he hasn't eaten, and he's going to return it in good condition. At this stage I did my eyes. I like to do them before finishing the flesh, that way if I mess up the eyes I'm not messing up all the flesh I finished as well. But I'm using a little bit of strong tone flesh wash, heavily thinned down with a medium, speed paint medium in this case, just so it really runs into the recesses and just adds a little bit more depth. The airbrush is great for sort of larger work, but little areas like the hands and the face can suffer a little bit from not building up in a more standard way, so you can add that depth back much easier with a little bit of a wash like that. You can use thin contrast paints as well, which I often do. I'm also just adding a little bit into some of the shadowed areas, so under the armpits in between those really bulky muscles. And then I'm using a couple of my favourite contrast paints that I use to add depth to the skin, and if you're regular viewers to the channel you'll see them loads and loads of times. But the purple colour I'm using in the recesses mostly and working up, so always start in the darkest area and then blend and feather out, and again that just adds a little bit more tonal depth to the skin. Skin is translucent, so it shows off all of the different colours and things that are underneath. So if you're able to add some glazes over the top to represent that, you get this really nice looking effect. So I'm just adding the purple in those darker areas. And then what I move on to do afterwards, the more scarlet colour, the reddish colour, I like to add that in other areas. So carrying on sometimes from where the darker purple is, adding into those muscle recesses, but then also on the faces, onto the lower parts. And I make sure that this is quite thin to start with. I'd rather add layers rather than cover over and make him look like he's got bad sunburn. So in this case, I've been very, very subtle with it. I'm using a wet palette for a contrast paint as well, allowing that moisture to thin it a little bit more, really letting it run into the mouth and the recesses, but keeping those bright highlights that I've done with the airbrush already there. So essentially we're adding in more shadow and definition with multitude of different washes and glazes. I find it works especially well aside from faces, which is really good if you just do the sort of the bottom third, so nose and mouth area, but also on the hands as well, on the tops of hands, going from where your wrist strap would be. I was going to say watch strap. I don't think many of the ogres are wearing watches, but they are wearing sort of wrist cuffs and things like that. But then also down in between the fingers. And I just find that I dip my brush back into some clean water and feather out and blend out and wipe away any excess. I have a wood painting tutorial on the channel where I show how I sort of use contrast paints and blend them together over an underpainted and dry brushed wooden texture to create some really nice effects. I'll pop a link in there now if I remember. I usually do. I'm using a simplified version of it here because there's not an awful lot of wood on these miniatures, but essentially I'm mixing a little bit of green and a little bit of a sort of a brownish colour. I'm using wildwood in this case, I think, off the top of my head. And thin them a little bit so they really run into those recesses and allow a lot of that underpainting to show through. You just end up with this really nice, almost pre-highlighted effect, and we'll come back to that later. While those skin glazes and the wood washes are drying, I'm heading back to the leather areas, the pouches and packets. And because we've got that underpainting underneath that contrast paint I've already mentioned, they look quite cool as they are. So I'm really just kind of accentuating what already looks highlighted. So I found a couple of mid to bright orangey browns, one almost flesh coloured, and I'm using them to sort of colour in what I already see. So right on the edges of those packs in this instance, just using the side of my brush to accentuate what is already looks like it's highlighted with the orange colour. And then afterwards I come back with that really, really bright almost flesh colour that's in the greens and browns set that I'm using here from Army Painter, and just add an even smaller highlight on. So it's essentially going to more standard traditional layering highlighting now on top of that contrast work over zenithal that I already did. There's always a little area that's sort of not covered by the bulk of colours, and there's this little thing dangling down from his spear shaft there, so I'm just using some grey contrast paint. But then I move on to the greys, back to the same greys that I used through the airbrush earlier on for the banner, and I'm using it to highlight the black boots that I painted right at the beginning using the Grim Black speed paint, and I'll be using these same grey paints to highlight and tart up the banner as well. I was also lazy and made all my ogres have black hair as partly, again, to limit the palette, something I was going for here. I didn't want lots of different bright coloured hairs. I like the idea they all come from a certain region and the hair is pretty dark, and it's very little hair showing. It's mostly sort of side whiskers on the go. So I'm using the same paints for that as well. The brighter grey gets a little bit more use, but I do have the darker one on my palette if I need it. And then because this banner is all black and is designed to have a different colour edge, which I didn't want to do, I wanted it, again, as like I said, a limited palette, I'm using a thinned version of Grim Black on the main area in the middle and just glazing it in to reinforce those shadows. And then I can go back with an even brighter grey here and just highlight up that little sort of dangling stone that he has from that spear that we started this little section with. Now back to a tiny little bit of dry brushing again. This is a bone colour. I'm going very lightly over that sort of bamboo hat. I might have called it a straw hat earlier because it's clearly not, it's bamboo. And then also over the areas that I've put that wood colour wash on as well. It just picks up that little bit of detail again, so then I can come back with skeleton horde in this case and just glaze back over, and it just again works a little bit like doing an easy edge highlight, builds a little bit more sort of texture and volume into it, makes it look a little bit more realistic and lifts it slightly, but without the need for loads and loads of sort of brush work really. And that's part of how you can sort of use underpainting, paint something and then reapply some more underpainting to accentuate it and get a really nice effect. But now it's time to start on the metallics, and I'm using P3 metallics at the moment. I've been trying them out, I'm quite enjoying them, and I like to start a lot of my metals, again, if you've watched the channel a lot you'll know that, with a brown base, especially if I want the metal to look old and grim. And you can really build up to silvers and steels and also golds from a solid dark brown metal base. I was explaining this to one of my students, one of my patron students, you get the top tier patron the other day, that the reason I call it brown metal, because I think that the naming conventions with some metallics is a bit messed up from one range of paint to the other. I've got no problems with what things are named, but they're often a little bit confusing. Sometimes it's called bronze, sometimes it's called copper, and then in another range their names are swapped around, but the colours match up the other way, if that makes sense. I'm not explaining that very well, but essentially brown metallic paint covers a wider sort of explanation of different things, and I really like these sort of deeper dark brown slightly metallic paints that you can work and layer upon afterwards. I'm going to be using a little touch of gold to sort of embellish some of the posher areas of this. I didn't want to make the centre of their gut plates, these Cathay shields, coloured. I like the idea that they're stripped back and any coloured cloth and things have been removed from them or paint has been worn away, but I do like the idea that they're obviously still expensive pieces of armour that they've pilfered. So I'm painting some of the areas gold, and I'm using a sort of desaturated necro gold, would be my favourite from Scale 75. It was easy to get hold of anymore, but I'm using a P3 version of it, which I quite like. Ancient gold from Two Thin Coats is another really great example. You know the kind of thing I mean. Now this is called brass balls, which maybe is a polished brass colour, I don't know. Another person would call that gold, hence my chatter around naming conventions and what we perceive as a colour and what we expect. But this is a desaturated, almost sort of dull lemonish gold, but it's still pretty vibrant as well, and I'm just using it as the top highlight for some of these golden areas, and I quite like it. It's less sort of gaudy, but still pretty cool. All of them has one of the little Cathay teapots, obviously used to wash down the previous owner's meat from his teeth, but I've decided to paint that a slightly different colour and more of an orangey copper colour, and then we're on to the range of metals that I'm using for the steel areas, and I'm working through 4 more paints on top of the dark brown which I've already put there. You could just start from the darkest almost black metallic paint and that would look pretty cool as well, but again, leaving a little bit of that brown in some of the recesses just really adds to the depth and makes that steel look old and weathered and used. So if I was doing a shining prince's armour, then I may not have that brown underlayer, but I really like it for a lot of the stuff I do, and it's absolutely perfect for working on a miniature like these ogres. And you can see here that I'm using a sponging tool. This is a makeup applicator. Sometimes I use a sponging tool from Knott's Hobbies, a little cube for it as well. It's got a nice point, so it's really handy to use. And I'm also using the hairy brush as well, where there's areas that I can't get into without getting paint anywhere I don't want to. But I use the sponge where I can because it builds up really nice, subtle, soft layers, which is a little bit akin to airbrushing in some ways. It's a lot harder to build those smooth layers up using a regular paintbrush. It takes a lot longer and a lot more skill to do that, and you have to sort of be a bit more patient to do it, and some metallic paints don't wet blend very well, so you have to do lots and lots of fine layers, and by using sponging method like this you can really focus where that light catches and make it really pop and really shiny. And that's essentially what you're watching me do here, work my way through those 4 silverish colour paints right to the top one and building up layers, making sure that each layer is a little bit smaller each time, building towards the brightest silver right at the top where the light is catching. And I think that the effect is pretty cool, and it's really easy to do. Of course I want them to be shiny, not shiny, because they had nice kit and some ogre kit as well, but I want to make them look a little bit more weathered. I'm using ready mixed oil paints for this. Now don't get me wrong, I use ready mixed oil paints all the time instead of regular paints with my metallics, with most things really. They run into the recesses really nicely, most of it evaporates, you don't end up with staining on the surface, and when you do you can remove it again. But I'm applying a very sort of dark brown mud wash style thing to the weapons, but for the armour I'm using more of a sepia tone, which is a little bit more subtle. I like the idea that they maybe pilfered a bit more of the armour from Cathay, and it's better quality, but they're still using almost their own favourite old really bludgeon type weapons and things. And again, the sepia colour works better on the gold areas as well, rather than that darker brown for what I'm using. So I'm just slapping it all over. Even on the banner here, I'm allowing it to run down and painting some streaks, so when that dries, those lines will disappear. It just looks like it's kind of weathered and been rained on a lot. And now I'm using some Artist's thinner, and this is fast drying thinner from AK. You can get Sansador. You just make sure that it's not a DIY store's white spirit or something, because that'll just strip your paint right off. If you're using oil paints on your miniatures, it's often advisable to use a bit of a gloss varnish first to protect them, and then a matte afterwards if you want to dull it down. I wouldn't for metallics. I haven't used that on these miniatures at all. Generally, I find that metallic paints are robust enough to deal with it. If you're using oil paints on other areas, you may want to make sure you varnish first, but I've not done it here. But I am using old brushes, and I am being a little bit careful around those regular paint areas. Getting towards the final effects now. This is True Blood. It's their version of Blood for the Blood God. If you've used the Citadel version, they're pretty much identical products as far as I can tell. Like them both. This one's probably a little bit cheaper, and you've got the squirty bottle if you want to. I put it on the wet palette. Usually it's good with a bit of moisture. I'd rather build up that intensity rather than start with that, but you can thin it easily and wash it around. So less is more, so build up slowly with this. I think these brutal weapons deserve a little bit of blood on them, but I don't want to look like my 7-year-olds painted them either. I'm just finishing off now with the betas. I won't go into detail how I've done those. I think I've covered them on other videos. If you'd like to know more, I've got a video on doing basing. So there we are, the finished unit. I think they've got enough of a theme that they've lived in Cathay for a while, but still have the Warhammer Ogre theme. That's what I was going for. Like I said at the beginning of the video, this isn't a groundbreaking thing to do with these miniatures. If you've got Cathay miniatures and you've got leftover bits and you've got ogre balls, those shields just fit directly over the gut plates, which changes a lot. And then leaving off a lot of the more grim ogre things like the hunks of meat and stuff, you can actually make them look like they're a little bit more regimented. Again, with the paint scheme as well, I've given them all the same colour trousers as if they were in service of a Cathayan lord or something like that, and I think that works well enough. The rear rank with their double-handed weapons look pretty much just like ogres, and I could easily use this in an ogre army just as a unit of ogre bulls as well. But I think they've got enough sort of flair about them that they can be called Badlands Ogres as well. So I'm happy with the mix. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. I had loads of fun painting these, as you can probably tell by the way I was talking throughout the video. But if you did like them and you have enjoyed the video, please let me know by liking the video and dropping a comment below. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please go and do that. Ring the bell and all of that kind of stuff. It really helps the channel grow and helps you hopefully see the next videos that I put out. Please do head over and check out the channel Discord. It's a super friendly place. There's a link in the video description. There's also a link to my Patreon, which is the very best way of supporting me making videos. But instead of ending the video the way I normally would, I just wanted to pay a very brief bit of respect to John Blanche. I know a lot of people have been doing this in posts on social media. I did a very short one, and I don't want to go on about it in any great detail. I've met the man once for 2 seconds at a Warhammer Fest, and I had no other dealings with him at all, and it would be disingenuous to try and suggest that I do. But he's definitely inspired my thoughts and love for Warhammer ever since 3rd edition, when I got into the game. Especially in those earlier days, his own artwork was so fundamental and part of the core of driving what Warhammer looks like. And the way Warhammer looks as a painter is incredibly important to me. And then of course as art director in the later years, well, pretty much throughout, but definitely towards the later years when he was doing more direction and less own artwork himself, he had a huge impact in guiding the overall aesthetics and look of Warhammer. And for a game and a thing that's the most important thing in my life outside of my family, my own family, it is my pastime, it's my love, it's my job, then the impact, the knock-on effect that his work and impact clearly has been very, very important to me. And hopefully that his friends and family will be able to take comfort in the outpouring of love that we've seen from the community. So rest in peace, John Blanche.